This is Euroscopic, your weekly roundup of what happened, what's happening, and what might happen in and to Europe. In partnership with EU Observer, we bring you insights and reporting from their people on the ground across the European Union and beyond. I'm William Bluecroft, a journalist based in Berlin and writer of the Germany Substack newsletter called The Schland.
And I am Martin Gag, the author of Inconclusive Thoughts, also at Substack.
We're recording on Wednesday, February 28th, so events may have changed by the time you hear this podcast, wherever your ears go for podcasts. We're going to be discussing this week new mishegas over anti-Semitism. Farmer protests get more and more fierce. Sweden finally gets into NATO. We have a big story of France's latest comments, or Emmanuel Macron's latest comments, regarding support for Ukraine. And we have two great interviews coming up, one with Välkommen. He's a visiting fellow for the European Center for Foreign Relations, a Russian himself and an expert on Russian politics. And Karin Darigo, she is the would-be Spitzenkandidat for Mira 25. I talked to her just last night at an event for her party is collecting signatures to get on the ballot for European elections later this year. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, William.
I heard your Bialetti percolating there in the background just a few minutes ago, so that's a good sign.
Indeed, my Bialetti has finished percolating, and now I'm sitting here with a large cup of very black coffee.
Likewise, over here.
So, only way to start a Wednesday in which we record, and usually late in the week, but here we are.
Yeah, it's been quite a week. We news developed, which shifted our plans, and you got to roll with the punches.
But anyway, here we are. So, what are the big stories that you have caught your attention this week?
Well, I think it can't be ignored, even though it's a bit of an older story by this point. But it came out really right after we finished our last week's episode, so it's worth a mention about Fabrice Leggeri, French politician, former head of Frontex, the European Union's border guard. Announcing his intention to run with the far right in French politics in the European elections, which to me is such a stark admission of how anti-migrant the European Union is. Frontex has come under massive criticism for pushbacks, for dirty deals with third countries just on the edge of the European Union external border, really not being very great to upholding international law, humanitarian law, and the EU's own values when it comes to refugees and migrants. And the Frontex has, of course, always pushed back on that. And now we have the former head of Frontex very unabashedly joining the far right in his future political desires. This coming on the same day that just a couple hours from now, maybe we'll talk about it next week, that there's going to be a report coming out about Frontex's actions in specifically the Mediterranean.
I think it's sort of important to say that obviously the fact that Leggeri's political intuitions might lay far to the right of the European political spectrum, although one would argue that increasingly that is where the European political consensus finds itself. It does not mean, of course, that he implemented either a policy of xenophobia or a policy of, violence, but does bring questions about the political culture of the institution, particularly in light of all the criticism that has been leveled against the organization. In any case, the story that I'm following this week is actually the first of two stories of anti-Semitism on which we will touch this week, which is that
so-called anti-Semitism.
So-called anti-Semitism.
I think it's important to point out.
So this one is actually, I think that we can go farther than that and say that this is actually the first one of two fake anti-Semitism stories. The French government has found or insists that the FSB, Russian Secret Service, is responsible for a set of graffitis of Jewish stars of David, that were found in buildings where Jews presumably live around different parts of Paris last year as the war in Gaza, or the bombing of Gaza, began to take place. So obviously, this would be a way. The accusation here is that the Russian FSB was actually sowing essentially social tension between the very large Muslim community and the often repeated sieged Jewish community of France. That's a story that is bound to have an effect on the way that the French discourse, particularly around the government, focuses on Russia. We're coming back to this topic today, right? How the French are talking about Russia and are talking about the war in Ukraine. So this is one more argument, or this one more charge being leveled.
Right. Well, it's just amazing how wide open Western societies are leaving themselves, how vulnerable they're making themselves to the potential of Russian misinformation, disinformation, and meddling in their societies at a time that everyone's warning against the involvement of Russian secret services in the Western political systems, especially as we go into the European elections. There's been major warnings about that. The European Parliament seems to be on high alert. And yet, due to these hypersensitivities around anti-Semitism, especially in France and Germany, it really is a shoe-in or an easy in for potential Russian forces to make problems in society, social tension, and which of course benefit the far right, right? Because it sows Islamophobia and xenophobia. They're kind of two most famous and helpful calling cards. And over in Germany, of course, no stranger to seeing anti-Semitism everywhere, mostly made up in the heads of German officials or used as a way to, express their own Islamophobia or xenophobia. We just wrapped up the Berlinale, the Berlin Film Festival, in Berlin. Always a site, like most huge cultural institutions, cultural events, always a place that also often stirs some controversy or headlines. The Berlinale already got into hot water about whether it was or was not going to invite elected members of Berlin State Parliament from the AfD, the far-right party here. They ended up disinviting them after inviting them due to pressure. But at the same time, they're also under pressure by people who essentially align with the far right on their anti-Muslim and Islamophobic and xenophobic views when it comes vis-a-vis through the war in Gaza that Israel is perpetrating. And we saw that in the most acutely in the acceptance speech of two documentary filmmakers, Yuval Abraham and Masafer Yatta. This is a Jewish-Israeli, Palestinian-Muslim filmmaking pair that won this documentary about, broadly speaking, about the occupation. And in their speech, in their acceptance speech, they used it to call out the occupation. They used the A word, the G word, apartheid and genocide, that are words you're not allowed to use, not supposed to use in polite company in Germany. And that caused quite a stir. You had headlines all over German media and European media with statements from German officials and Berlin state officials calling this anti-Semitic, again, completely blurring the line between Israel criticism and actual hatred of Jews. I saw lots of headlines where literally you would click a link that would mention anti-Israel criticism. You click the link, and the headline then swaps out anti-Israel for anti-Semitic. So this is kind of the state of play in Germany right now. And then the cultural officials here in Germany really stepped in it when they tried to parse this line or split hairs, where they were actually applauding Yuval, the Jewish Israeli documentarian, for his speech about peace and living together, etc. But they weren't applauding the Palestinian who was on stage with him, his friend, his colleague, what this whole film was about. So it's just this bizarre effort in this ongoing anti-Semitism campaign that we're seeing in Germany, which is really all about Germans and German officials reassuring themselves that they themselves have gotten past their own history at the expense not only of Muslims and Palestinians and Arabs, but of Jews themselves, because you have Jews under attack for being called anti-Semitic, and with really real consequences. Yuval Abraham just tweeted yesterday about how his life is now in danger because he's been accused of being an anti-Semite, and he now has right-wing Jewish extremists at his door threatening his life and the life of his family. So very real consequences for some of the strange policies that many German officials are carrying out right now.
So other two stories left to mention. One is the fact that the farmers' protest, which has now just been visited upon Brussels, essentially turned into a bit of a war zone, didn't it?
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. This was as, I believe, EU agricultural ministers were meeting to discuss, agricultural policy, subsidies, tax breaks, etc., which is what we've been seeing these protests responding to at national level all around the European Union, including most notably Germany, Poland, and France. And the photos are quite strong, right? Quite stark. Police using water cannon, the farmer's favorite tactic of spraying them. It's a bit early. I haven't had breakfast yet. It's a bit early, but the liquid manure, delicious. And really quite a violent scene outside of Brussels.
Yeah, I mean, sure enough, it's also a question as to where this kind of heavy hand does not actually help them to engross their lines. But in any case, I mean, what we're seeing is quite clearly an escalation of, the way in which the farmer protests are facing the state and the way the state is facing the farmer protests, at least in Belgium. Lastly, Sweden made it into NATO thanks to Mr. Orban back in Budapest.
We can distract ourselves from all of the tensions, the domestic tensions that we've just talked about, because we can instead project our unity, our military and foreign policy unity by finally Hungary voting with Orban's blessing to let Sweden into NATO after 649 days. It only took 649 days to get there, something that should have been, or at least NATO officials said would be very quick, because at least technically speaking, Finland and Sweden very easily clear the hurdles for applying to NATO. They've been NATO partners for decades. So the tactics, the equipment, the training, all of that is already aligned with NATO. So this was very much purely a political problem that was holding up the addition of first Finland and then Sweden.
The fact that this was actually done first by Turkey and then by Orban, by Hungary, once again goes to show the very unpleasant dynamics of the way that Europe does politics with its partners. Okay, so this week there's been quite a bit of talk about obviously Russia and the Ukrainian war and the effects of the Ukrainian war, particularly on Europe. As we have seen, there is a big development in France. We will get to that a bit later in the show. But there is also a way in which every time something happens in the Ukrainian front, there is a direct effect on the political makeup of Europe. And one of the issues that a friend at the EU Observer, Michael Konin, has been following is the way in which the Russian invasion of Ukraine has impacted the parliament dynamics and the different alliances and allegiances of parliamentarians in Brussels, of MEPs, to the different parts of the conflict. So right ahead, we talk with Michael.
Mikhail, thank you so much for joining us on Euroscopic, especially last minute. We really appreciate your time. I think the first question I have is, what do we, if I may say, so broadly say, we in the West, which is a slippery term, but we in the West, what do we not understand about Russian politics?
Well, this is a good question. I think that maybe the main thing that West usually don't understand, that despite of this full-scale invasion in Ukraine, which Kremlin started 2 years ago now, there are some kind of rationalization inside of the Russian politics, Russian elites, Russian government, and they can struggle with the problems which West and Ukraine would like to push them to Russia quite effective. Yeah. And we see that from the economical side, I mean, so that sanctions is not working really good and can't crush the Russian economy and ruin the economy. And also we can see it in the international affairs, for example, when West and Ukraine try to persuade the countries from the global south to support the idea of the pro-Ukrainian mood, yeah. But Kremlin works with them too, especially in Africa and in Latin America, and we see that the results is quite effective for them. So the world is now in their big big unity, and especially in the global south for pro-Ukrainian mood. So this is the main misunderstanding, I think, about Russia, which we have now.
Is that based on a Western hubris? This idea that, this kind of default assumption that the world wants to be more like the West and therefore will support the West in its policy goals and its geostrategic interests? Or is there something more and deeper going on there?
No, I think it's based on the wishful thinking. So Western countries, the European Union and the United States believe that if they do something which they think that will be effective, they they try to see this effectiveness in every step that they made. So, but in reality, reality is quite more complex than they usually think, and they usually try to understand. And so now we see the problem in the front line with their ammunition in the Ukraine, which West, that they have some problems with their providing to the Ukraine and to the Kiev, yeah, and in some other spheres too.
Mikhail, I'd love to know from a Russian perspective, because we hear it obviously from Western media, why does Russia seem to be standing up, economically speaking and militarily speaking, doing a better job in surviving the sanctions and surviving the isolation better than many Western policymakers would have hoped? Why is that sort of, from a Western perspective, disappointing?
Well, first of all, I think because Russia over the 15 or 20 years built some kind of allies inside of the Western countries too, whom now support Kremlin ideas for providing the sanction goods, different goods, especially which is needed to the military stuff. And they use the corruption, which is of course, existed not only in the authoritarian regimes, but also in the Western countries, and they try to use it for working with their really necessity things which they need to have for better military equipment and all other things.
Michael, we just heard that Macron might be considering the shipment of Western troops or sending Western troops into Ukraine to fight against Russia. What do you make of this, and what do you think the consequences will be? Not only on the Russian side, but sort of, you've been looking at the European Parliament and the reaction. What do you think the reaction would be there?
Well, we see that, what we really see now, we see the decline of the support on the pro-Ukrainian moods inside of the European countries. So we see it from, for example, the survey which was conducted by the European Council of Foreign Relations and published a few days ago. So, and I think that Macron, as the leader of Europe, who would like to be the leader of Europe, not only the France but the European Union, I mean. So he tried to push back these moods, these attitudes, and try to support and try to persuade all other representatives of the European elites inside of the European parliaments to support the idea that we need now to support Ukraine more. Yeah, so we haven't any chances to give them fail in the front line or something like that. So only the thing which we can really do, yeah, we can really support and give more ammunition and maybe to send our troops there, I mean in Ukraine, and to help Ukrainians to combat with the Russian military machine, which is quite stronger than they. Yeah, but inside of the European Parliament, I think that it will be really problematic thing because of side of some European groups, European politics groups, especially with the far right involvement. So they think that using the troops after that they're providing the military stuff as ammunition and equipment to Ukraine, yeah, is really bad idea, and they try to use it to persuade their readers, listeners, and the people in their countries, yeah, who support far-right ideas, to give them more votes in the upcoming June election of the European Parliament.
I mean, you have written a couple of things for the EU Observer, and in the latest one, you more or less single out sort of the far right inside the European Parliament as sort of doing a bit of the bidding of the Russian position. But I mean, in Germany, we have the experience of even Schröder, I mean, the SPD, the socialists, being pretty deeply entwined with, you know, some of the Russian machine.
So the problems, yeah, the conflicts between different political parties, not only on the national level, but on the European level, as the European political groups, yeah. But in different questions, not only about the Ukraine or Kremlin, they are more or less there now, and especially not now, but before I mean in 2022, they have some kind of unity about what Kremlin did, so they vote for the resolution in European Parliament in a pro-Ukrainian and anti-Kremlin way. So only really radicals from different parties, but small parties, I mean, vote against this resolution on pro-Ukrainian modes. Yeah, but also there are some really inner European agenda, which we see the conflicts between these European political groups. And for example, about the green agenda, yeah, or the agricultural issues, which we saw last year, for example, about the migration, of course. So there are some these strict things, yeah, and among these representatives of the different European political groups, we, with my colleague, observe the party discipline, yeah, the discipline which provide the people who are involved in the working in the European Parliament, I mean the member of European Parliament, and they are affiliated with the two parties, the national parties and the European political group. So how they vote in according to the party line or vote against them, yeah. And so what we saw that the people, the member of European Parliament from the, for example, socialists, votes really strictly in the party line, yeah. Maybe this is because of they have more conscious about the decision which was made in the pro-European way, or maybe because they are more have some ideas in the line with their real parties and European political groups, so they're less distinctive, yeah. But we see that the leftist is really vote in many cases, yeah, close to the 100% cases of the final voting in the line of their European political groups and in the line of their national party. But when we look into the far right parties in the national level and in the European politics groups, we see that in the European politics group, for example, ID and ECR have really not so strict party discipline. Yeah, so usually some representatives of the ID, they vote against the the majority of the European politics, European party group. Yeah, and so it demonstrates for us that bodies, they have some kind of problems with the consensus, and it is a good signal for us if we will have the more far right, more maybe right wing parliament after the June election. We see that the party discipline can give us a chance. I mean, us the pro-European representatives, pro-European forces, to provide some laws, accept the support, accept the stickling from the far right forces, far right parties.
Mikhail, I'd like to go back and follow up on the soldiers, Macron's comment about sending European troops to Ukraine. Now, I understand that a lot of that was posturing. Macron very much had an interest to show that the West is still behind Ukraine, and any kind of real action on that idea is a long way off, if ever. Nonetheless, from a Russian view, what is the Kremlin's or Vladimir Putin's reaction to such a statement, either now or as that idea possibly picks up steam?
Well, for now, we haven't a lot of comments from Kremlin about this Macron's idea, because it was happened really recently. Yeah, but before, Vladimir Putin underlines a lot of times that the Kremlin have some kind of red lines, which West can't cross. And one of these red line was the participation in the conflict, in the war, using the troops, the Western troops. The NATO one or the national one, it doesn't matter. So, but it will be really the big red line for the Kremlin if it is really happening. But you know that, for example, 1.5 years ago, so the red line which Kremlin tried to write, tried to demonstrate to the West, was also about the providing their modern ammunition, for example, modern tanks for Ukraine, or modern airplanes. So and these red lines really crossed by the West without any real problem from the Kremlin. So Kremlin doesn't react in any cases for these issues. So because Kremlin hasn't any resources to do it.
Mikhail, thank you very much. We have to leave it at that. Really appreciate you visiting us, and we hope to see you again around here. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you for having me here. So it's nice to talk with you, and see you later.
Thanks so much to Mikhail Välkommen for joining us. He's a visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations, based in Vienna and Riga, as we heard, looking at Russia and Russia's influence in the European Union. You can catch his latest article on EU Observer at euobserver.com. It's a fascinating one. You should check it out. And that kind of brings us over to the bigger story that's happened in the last couple days, which is this sort of effort to re-energize the Western support for Ukraine that's been flagging the last several months, I would say ever since Ukraine's disappointing performance in the counteroffensive. Well, I want to couch that in the fact that the expectations for the counteroffensive were insanely high and maybe unrealistic. So, Martin, why don't you bring in that aspect?
So most certainly the summer offensive, which was there was talk of Ukraine ending the year in Crimea, and essentially the tide being completely turned, essentially flattered pretty spectacularly. It produced not only, I think, a break in the morale on the ground. I mean, although quite clearly Ukrainians remain very committed, but it most certainly produced a sense of exhaustion, I think, among Ukrainian supporters, which, I think in many populations facing crisis of their own, Europe most certainly, began to lose interest and patience. And the situation that we find ourselves now is that in Advika, Russians have actually taken back a strategically relevant position right outside the Donbass. And what this actually translating into is that in Europe, there is a very serious and very consistent fear that this might be Russia turning the tide and essentially beginning what might be an offensive back on the road to Kiev, which they had more or less abandoned, although there were still intermittent bombings and intermittent, air attacks. Now, in the middle of all of this, Macron, who I think, let me just reserve judgment for a few minutes at least, has basically said this week, at the beginning of the week, that putting French or perhaps European or perhaps NATO boots on the ground in Ukraine is not beyond question. And of course, this produced a strong reaction from Russia, which said that that would mean war, likely against NATO. And of course, this also galvanized the European political landscape. The Germans were very quick to point out that there was no consensus on this matter at all, that it was Macron just talking. And this is kind of a big deal in my mind, not because of the Russian bravado, which we have seen in other occasions when the West was willing to and then sending modern weaponry for the Ukrainians to defend themselves, but because it is a very strange wedge to put in the middle of European politics at a time in which the waters are quite turbulent. So, it does bring some extra political tension, and it offers people like Orban, who are, sitting on the fence forever now, the possibility essentially of finding some what probably are reluctant allies politically. What are your thoughts, Bill?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts when it comes to this bizarre, very hasty, effort to re-energize support for Ukraine. Not only Macron's statement itself, but everything surrounding it. Remember, this came out of a meeting in Paris on Monday that Macron and his people very quickly put together, kind of coming out of the Munich Security Conference that most people describe as gloom and doom, just to try to get people back on message, get people back, to that 2022 fervor of supporting Ukraine against Russia. And a friend of the show, Andrew Redman, who we had on recently with the EU Observer, he has an article today talking to people, basically saying Macron was just kind of thinking out loud. It really didn't mean anything. He was just trying to say stuff that sounded good. Remember, Macron and France, major military power at the European level, has actually done very little relative to the size of its economy and the size of its military-industrial complex. Relatively little for Ukraine. This is something that Germany often points out. Now, France hits back and says it's quality over quantity. Yes, we haven't given as much money or equipment as the Germans have, or many other countries have, including much smaller countries. But what we've given is very high quality and very effective, and exactly what the Ukrainians need, while the Germans are still dithering on Taurus cruise missiles, for example, just as they dithered on Leopard tanks. And fighter jets are, of course, out of the question from the German perspective. So this idea of troops on the ground, I just don't see how that happens, right? Are the French really going to put French troops into Ukraine? It sounded like this kind of a marketing effort to show that France is still there, France is still on Ukraine's side.
I think that what you're seeing is Macron really taking open aim at the Germans. I mean, one of the things he said is making fun of the German position at the beginning of the war was, the Germans were offering sleeping bags and helmets, and that position changed. What I find a bit unsettling about what was said is that, in fact, he points to a change in the Russian position in relation to not only to Ukraine, but to its aims in general. At a time in which I want to remind you, I mean, there were a lot of heads of defense in different countries, including Sweden, including the UK, that not too long ago were not only talking about, preparedness for a potential war with Russia, but in countries like the UK, there was sort of distant rumors of enlistment. So I think that in a sense it's true that this seems flippant and, it's hard to say exactly how this would work out. Not to mention the fact that it does what I think politically is completely inconvenient, which is, as I said, separate the waters, but it does echo something that has been said in other parts of the region, which is that there is sort of a gesture towards an increased risk of confrontation with Russia if Ukraine is allowed to fall.
So, yeah, it should be clear that NATO officials immediately quashed that idea of troops ever being in Ukraine as part of any kind of settlement or whatever next step in the war. The other big thing to come out of that meeting from the French perspective is appearing to sign up to this particularly Czechia idea of we don't have in Europe the production capacity to meet the goals we've made on the ammunition. Let's just buy the ammunition, much like we did the COVID vaccines, from out there on the market around the world. And this has been a long simmering debate. We know that the EU promised 1 million 155 millimeter shells to Ukraine by March. It looks like they're only on track to be able to give half of that. Part of the reason is because they want to, quote, buy European, which is good for the economies and the industries of European countries. And then within that, you have European countries competing with themselves. But the EU doesn't have the capacity to do what the North Koreans can do and provide that amount of weaponry. So there's been this long simmering debate. We have the money, let's just buy it. And the French in particular, not only the French, but the French in particular have been against that because they want to write a check to their own military industrial base. But now it looks like France and Macron might be breaking in favor of let's just buy the shells and get those 1 million shells over to Ukraine and deal with the production base later. So there's a lot of instability, shall we say, in European politics. That doesn't look like it's going to be changing. Nonetheless, it's not discouraging some people from wanting to jump into the fray. And that's why I was able to talk with Karin Derrigo. She is the would-be Spitzenkandidat, that is the lead candidate of a party for European elections, if her party, Mira 25, is able to get enough signatures in Germany to run on the ballot in European elections. That is where I caught up with her just last night, where they were at a cafe in the Berlin district of Neukölln, where German citizens or European citizens were able to sign up for basically being able to get the party onto the ballot.
So Mira 25 is a pretty curious machine, isn't it? I mean, this is a German operation related to the Varoufakis broader European operation, isn't it? I mean, what is it exactly, and why should we care about it, Bill?
Right. I was also confused, and I talked to Karin about this, because Mira 25 is basically an outgrowth of what some people might know better as DM25, which in Greece is an actual political party, but elsewhere in Europe is not a party. It's just a movement, a left-wing movement. And this is a pan-European project. It's in Germany, it's in Italy, it's in Sweden, it's of course in Greece, it's in a few other countries. And in Germany, Mira 25 exists as a party at a German level, and this is them trying to get onto the European level for European elections. And that's what I talked to Karin about. I think one important point of disclosure is that I did sign my name to get them onto the ballot, and that's less out of any ideological preferences than just I think democratic politics need new ideas, and democratic politics need grassroots efforts, and that's what this is. And I think it's great that regardless of viewpoints or ideology, that people are interested in democratic politics and interested in not just protesting and taking to the streets, but actually trying to win at the ballot box. So let's go over to my conversation with Karin.
The easiest question first, just tell me who you are, like what you do. What are you? Who are you?
What are you?
What are you?
No, well, first of all, I'm Italian. I'm 37, turning 38 this year. I've been in Germany 4 years, and I came during the pandemic, so it was also quite tough. I was living in Switzerland before. I did many jobs, and I like to say that I come from a corporate world because I've always worked for big companies in sales, in marketing, and now I'm a buyer, so I'm in the buying sector, which allowed me to see everything from the point of view of commerce and international ones. So, yeah, I'm not the typical academic or activist, unfortunately, but yeah, I decided to take this step now because I really, at my age, I cannot really stay here and look at what is happening, and yeah, I needed to take a stand, so that's why I started then.
But when you say you can't stand what's happening anymore, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I think mostly the injustice and the difference, and then the difference of treatment of rights that there are in the world and coming more and more near to us, because it's not before we could really close our eyes and stay at home and not think about what was happening around the world. Now problems have arrived here in our neighborhood, basically, and we cannot just turn away and not think about it. So it's an urgency. It's a need. I don't want to live in a world like this, and I'm not even expecting somebody else to do something for me. So I'm used to go hands-on, let's say, and start trying to be something. If we will manage, it's better. If not, at least I will have tried.
So can you explain to me what's happening? What are we doing here? What's happening?
So we are collecting signatures because we are trying to get on the ballot for the election in June. And since we need 4,000 in the whole Germany, we are really trying to gather them everywhere. So we are basically making ourselves available in every spot we can in order for people to find us. And it's amazing how many people have helped us so far. They're really people that we didn't know, that didn't even know the movement, but they just came and started help. So I want to thank them anyway for all the help so far. And we have the next 10 days, which are going to be super hard, but we are determined. I am super determined, and I will not accept defeat. So we will make it.
Do you know how many signatures you have so far?
Yes, although it's not super easy to say it officially because many are on their way between Vallant and other places. So we have, let's say, 80%. So in the next 2 weeks, the rhythm that we're working, we should definitely make it. The problem is that many of them get cancelled by the electoral office because of mistakes and stuff like this. So we have to gather more and to be on the safe side. It's very ready to work a bit more now than to regret it after.
How do you define your party position? Is it left? Is it new left? Is it something else? How do you see yourself politically or ideologically?
Yeah, I think our party is the new left. What exactly was missing, at least what was missing for me, because we are not only nostalgic, let's say, of older styles of politics, but we are really concentrated on values which are universal and timeless, like solidarity and peace and climate protection, and we want just to bring them on and try to offer alternatives which are new, which are not just revolution or other all the way of fighting, although they are also important. I'm not saying it's not, but still we need to offer real there are solutions, let's say.
We're in a moment where there's politically a massive movement to the right.
Yeah.
What kind of challenges does that pose to you coming in from the left? Or even the far right has taken votes from the left and taken ideas from the left.
But because the left, that's exactly the problem, and there's a reason why we are here. The left has given up all these values and to protect them actively. So what we have to do is to reappropriate ourselves of these values and the language and to create basically a new education, new culture, saying no, it's important to be solidary, so in solidarity with the other people, and and try to educate them. Sorry, not educate them to try to build a new culture of peace and solidarity.
So at least on social media, like the big push has been Israel-Gaza. How much do you think that issue can be a winning topic to attract voters?
Well, we are the only party basically being so loud about it, and since not even the beginning, not the 7th of October, much before, I mean, the position of the M25 about that was always very clear. And finally, we are being also rewarded for our sort of staying true to our values, basically, because before it was not such a big and important topic in Europe, obviously. But now that it is, people are starting to realize, okay, there is someone that really has the freedom to speak out about it without problems, because at the end we are independent, totally independent. That's also the positive thing of being funded only by our members. So, it counted a lot, and happily we are very confident that we are on the right side.
But still, I mean, for you to reach a broader amount of voters, people are things that are happening far away don't always seem to be a winning campaign. They might be morally correct, but they might not be politically smart. So how else do you plan on reaching out to voters? Well,
for sure we are pointing on climate justice, because and the justice that is not only related to our lifestyle. It has to be a social justice in terms of really the climate goals can only go hand in hand with solidarity goals and social justice. Climate and social are together. So I think this is a combination that is really fundamental, and also for people to understand, because there are a lot of climate groups, unfortunately, that are very liberal and even racist. So, especially in Germany. So I think it's important that we reaffirm the importance of these topics and these values at a broader level. And for the social justice also, we want also to introduce a universal basic income. So because we want people really to be independent, and it's like a leitmotif of our campaign also, the independency, not only geopolitically, which is a huge part of it, obviously, but also personally, because only if a person can allow itself to decide which job to take and which conditions, then he's really free to realize himself or herself. And that's the basic of democracy, because also people now don't take part in politics because they have way too much to do, too many problems to take care of. And if they are not freed from these things, then we cannot complain that people are not participating and we don't have democracy.
What do you think is the main reason or the main reasons? What do you see as the cause for the collapse of left-wing parties and the rise of the far right in the last, 5 years, 10 years across Europe?
Well, the left has just tried to emulate what the right was doing, basically. For immigration, for example, that's the most obvious example that we see in every country. Some parts of the left are just following, trying to regain back the votes that the left, that the right has taken, just coping them. And this is the worst thing that could happen, because then we stayed without left, and everybody is really suffering for that. And that's why we are here.
Right. How do you plan to solve this problem that the right has been very good at in creating a zero-sum game, right? Their gain is my loss is, or my gain is their loss. It's one or the other, especially when it comes to immigration. How do you plan to kind of get around that problem?
Well, it is a matter of explaining to people exactly how things are. It is sometimes boring. That's why we have to make it attractive, obviously. And we have to tell the truth also, because the right is very, very good in hiding things. So we have to call them out, especially about immigrants and availability of money for the social state, because this is just there are a lot of lies going on about that, and there is money. There are a lot of money. The richest people are becoming more and more rich, and we need to redistribute it. That's the only way to do it. For the rest, there is space for everybody, obviously.
And last question, because we are outside and you're very kind to be out here without a coat on. You're Italian. Why are you running for politics at a European level, but in Germany and for the German side of a political party?
It is, funny if I think about it. I would have never thought that I would have done something like this in my life, but I am proud of doing it because I feel I am a European, first of all. I don't feel necessary I'm only Italian. I am not only German, obviously, and I think this is a perfect combination for a person, especially in our European Union, to represent different perspectives and different sides of the story, let's say.
All right, let's go back inside to the music.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So many thanks to Karin for giving me some of her time, explaining some of her views. And in case our listeners were confused at all, hearing two different sounds there, we did half of the interview inside the cafe, and then a really lovely Greek folk band was about to start playing. So we popped outside for the second half of the interview.
So looking ahead, or looking at the week ahead, what stories are you going to be tracking?
Oh, I'm enjoying the bubbling up controversy of the Eurovision Song Contest in Israel. Israel's song for this year that they're submitting, apparently, although we don't know it yet because it's not officially released, apparently is highly political. It's called October Rain. I think that's all I need to say about that. And of course, this has nothing unique to Israel. The Eurovision Song Contest is officially non-political. Yeah, right. And if it's too political, the song, that song could be rejected. And Israel is threatening that if the song is rejected, they will not participate in Eurovision this year. So for Europeans out there, that's a big deal because, of course, Eurovision is like the Super Bowl meets the Oscars for a lot of people here. So that's kind of what I've been looking at. You?
So, I mean, for me, it's really just more Germany, more France. I'm just very curious as to how much this new confrontation between Macron and Scholz sort of now extending to, boots on the ground, but also weapons to Ukraine, weapons production. What does it turn into in the week ahead? So it's quite clear that both sides are essentially walking a tightrope in the middle of an election year. For Macron, it's mainly the European elections, where we hear that the Le Pen operation, the Rassemblement National, will probably do very, very well, which means that it will work essentially as a confidence vote or lack of confidence vote on Macron's government, which looks at this point in a very weak position. And then Scholz, who has, I think, a government in constant crisis and a waffling, ongoing 2 years of waffling positions concerning the Ukraine war. So in a way, this is interesting because of Russia and because of the situation on the ground, but it's also interesting because of the impact that it could have on a broadly construed central European political alignment.
And that's it for this week's Euroscopic. We hope you enjoyed it, and we thank you for being with us. Written by us, produced by us, and edited by Martin. You can catch us every week, either at our Substack or on euobserver.com. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts. Many thanks again to Välkommen and Karin de Rigo for joining us on this week's episode. Till next time, I'm William Glucroft.
I'm Martin Gack.
Thanks for listening.